What's up, Robs? We're back with Black No More, the 1931 Harlem Renaissance novel of George S. Schuyler.
In between I drank black coffee. Love's a hand-me-down brew. I'll never know a Sunday in this weekday room. I'm talking to the shadows. 1 o'clock to 4.
Chapter 9.
And Lord, how slow the
Only about 70 more pages. I should finish by the end of February. That's today, 22nd. Right.
Since the blues caught my eye, I'm hanging out on Monday. My Sunday dreams to dry. Now a man is born to come a-loving. A woman's born to weep and fret. To stay home and tend her husband. To drown her best regrets with coffee and
Cigarettes.
I'm moaning in the morning, moaning in the night, and in between it's nicotine and not much hard to find. Black coffee, feeling low as the ground. It's driving me crazy, just waiting for my baby to maybe come around.
She ain't a-coming.
To maybe come
She ain't coming, Ruby.
around.
She ain't a-coming.
For me, black coffee.
All right, bruvs. Back with Black No More by George S. Schuyler. 1931 science fiction novel by George S. Schuyler, a black book reviewer, book review editor, who wrote this scathing critique on race in 1931. And I think I'm going to have to sneeze here, but I'll try to get through with this. Chapter 9. Bunny, I've got it all worked out, announced Matthew several mornings later as he breezed into the office. Got what worked out? The political proposition. Spill it. Well, here it is. First, we get Givens on the radio, national hookup. You know, once a week for about 2 months. What'll he talk about? Are you going to write it for him? Oh, he knows how to charm the yokels. He'll appeal to the American people to call upon the Republican administration to close up the sanitariums of Dr. Crookman and deport everybody connected with Black No More. You can't deport citizens, silly, Bunny remonstrated. That don't stop you from advocating it. This is politics, big boy. Well, what else is on the program? Next, we start a campaign of denunciation against the Republicans in the warning, connecting them with the Pope, Black No More, and anything else we can think of. But they were practically anti-Catholic in 1928, weren't they? 7 years ago, Bunny, 7 years ago. How often must I tell you, that the people never remember anything? Next, we pull the old write to your congressman, write to your senator stuff. We carry the form letter in the warning. The readers do the rest. You can't win a campaign on that stuff alone, said Bunny disdainfully. Bring me something better than that, brother. Well, the other step is a surprise, old chap. I'm going to keep it under my hat until later on. But when I spring it, old time, it'll knock everybody for a row of toadstools. Matthew smiled mysteriously and smoothed back his pale blonde hair. When do we start this radio racket? Yawned Bunny. Wait, Wait till I talk it over with the chief, said Matthew, rising, and see how he's dated up. The following Thursday evening at 8:15 p.m., millions of people sat before their loudspeakers, expectantly awaiting the heralded address of the nation by the Imperial Grand Wizard of the Knights of Nordica. The program started promptly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience. This is station WHAT Atlanta, Georgia. Mortimer K. Shanker announcing, this evening we are offering a program of tremendous interest to every American citizen. The countrywide hookup over the chain of the Maronia Broadcasting Company is enabling 100 million citizens to hear one of the most significant messages ever delivered to the American public. Before introducing the distinguished speaker of the evening, however, I have a little treat in store for you. Mr. Jack Albert, the well-known Broadway singer and comedian, has kindly consented to render his favorite among the popular songs of the day, Vanishing Mammy. Mr. Albert will be accompanied by that incomparable aggregation of musical talent, Sammy Snort's Bogalusa Babies. Come on, I'll say a word or two to the ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience before you begin. Oh, hello, folks. Awfully glad to see so many of you out here tonight. Well, that is to say, I suppose there are many of you out there. You know, I like to flatter myself. Besides, I haven't my glasses, so I can't see very well. However, that's not the point. As the bootlegger says, I'm terribly pleased to have the opportunity of starting off a program like this with one of the songs I have come to love best. You know, I think a whole lot of this song. I like it because it has feeling and sentiment. It means something. It carries you back to the good old days that are dead and gone forever. It was written by Johnny Gulp with music by the eminent Japanese-American composer Forkrise Saki. And as Mr. Shanker told you, I am being accompanied by Sammy Snort's Bogalusa Babies through the courtesy of the Artillery Cafe, Chicago, Illinois. All right, Sammy, smack it. In 2 seconds, the blare of the jazz orchestra smote the ears of the unseen audience with the weird medley and clash of sound that had passed for music since the days of the Panama Pacific Exposition. Then the sound died to a whisper, and the plaintive voice of America's premier blackface troubadour came over the air. Vanishing Mammy, 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 oh mine, you've been away, dear, such an awfully long time. You went away. Sweet Mammy, Mammy, one summer night. I can't help thinking, Mammy, that you went white. Of course I can't blame you, Mammy, Mammy dear, because you had so many troubles, Mammy, to bear. But the old homestead hasn't been the same since I last heard you, Mammy, call my name. And so I wait, loving Mammy, it seems in vain, for you to come waddling back home again. Vanishing Mammy, Mammy, Mammy. I'm waiting for you to come back home again. Now, radio audiences, this is Mr. Mortimer Shanker speaking again. I know you all loved Mr. Albert's soulful rendition of Vanishing Mammy. We're going to try to get him back again in the very near future. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce you a man who hardly needs any introduction. A man who is known throughout the civilized world, a man of great scholarship, executive ability, and organizing genius, a man who has practically unassisted brought 5 million Americans under the banner of one of the greatest societies in this country. It affords me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience, to introduce Reverend Henry Givens, Imperial Grand Wizard of the Knights of Nordica, who will address you on the very timely topics of the menace of Negro blood. Oh no. Reverend Givens, fortified with a slug of corn, advanced nervously to the microphone. Fingering his prepared address, he cleared his throat and talked for upwards of an hour, during which time he successfully avoided saying anything that was true, the result being that the thousands of telegrams and long-distance phone calls of congratulation came into the studio. In his long address, he discussed the foundation of the Republic, anthropology, psychology, miscegnation, I don't know how to say it, cooperation with Christ, getting right with God, curbing Bolshevism, the bane of birth control, the menace of the modernists, science versus religion, and many other subjects of which he was totally ignorant. The greater part of his time was taken up in a denunciation of Black No More Incorporated. and calling upon the Republican administration of President Harold Goosey to report the vicious Negroes at the head of it or imprison them in the federal penitentiary. When he had concluded, in the name of our Savior and Redeemer, Jesus Christ, amen, he retired hastily to the washroom to finish the half pint of corn. I wonder what the half pint of corn was. Must have been Prohibition hooch. The announcer took Reverend Gibbons' place at the microphone. Now, friends, this is Mortimer K. Shanker again, announcing from station WHAT, Atlanta, Georgia. With a nationwide hookup over the chain of the Maronia Broadcasting Company, you have just heard a scholarly and inspiring address by Reverend Henry Gibbons, Imperial Grand Wizard of the Knights of Nordica on the menace of Negro blood. Reverend Gibbons will deliver another address at this station a week from tonight. Now, to end our program for the evening, friends, we are going to have a popular song by the well-known Goiter Sisters, lately of the State Street Follies, entitled Why Did the Old Salt Shaker? The agitation of the Knights of Nordica soon brought attention from the administration at Washington. About 10 days after Reverend Gibbons had ceased his talks over the radio, President Harold Goosey announced to the assembled newspapermen that he was giving a great deal of study to the questions raised by the Imperial Grand Wizard concerning Black No More Incorporated. The several truckloads of letters condemning the corporation had been received at the White House and were now being answered by a special corps of clerks. That several senators had talked over the matter with him and that the country could expect him to take some action within the next fortnight. At some point, I'm going to blow my nose here. At the end of a fortnight, the president announced that he had decided to appoint a commission of leading citizens to study the whole question thoroughly and to make recommendations. He asked Congress for an appropriation of $100,000 to cover the expenses of the commission. The House of Representatives approved a resolution to that effect a week later. The Senate, which was then engaged in a spirited debate on the World Court and the League of Nations, postponed consideration of the resolution for 3 weeks. When it came to vote before that august body, it was passed after long argument, with amendments and returned to the House 6 weeks after President Goosey had made his request of Congress. The resolution was passed in its final form. He then announced that inside of a week he would name the members of the commission. The president kept his word. He named the commission, consisting of 7 members, 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. They were mostly politicians temporarily out of a job. In a private car, the commission toured the entire country, visiting all of the Black No More sanitariums, the Crookman Lion hospitals, and the former Black Belts. They took hundreds of depositions, examined hundreds of witnesses, and drank large quantities of liquor. 2 months later, they issued a preliminary report in which they pointed out that the Black No More sanitariums and lying-in hospitals were being operated within the law, that only 1 million Negroes remained in the country, that it was illegal in most of the states for pure whites and persons of Negro ancestry to intermarry, but that it was difficult to detect fraud because of collusion. As a remedy, the commission recommended stricter observance of the law, minor changes in the marriage laws, the organization of special matrimonial courts, with trained genealogists attached to each, better equipped judges, more competent district attorneys, the strengthening of the Mann Act, the abolition of the roadhouse, the closer supervision of dance halls, a stricter censorship on books and moving pictures, and government control of cabarets. The commission promised to publish the complete report of its activities in about 6 weeks. 2 months later, when practically everyone had forgotten that there had ever been such an investigation, the complete report of the commission, comprising 1,789 pages in fine print, came off the press. Copies were sent broadcast to prominent citizens and organizations. Exactly 9 people in the United States read it. The warden of a country jail, the proofreader at the government printing office, the janitor of the city hall in Ashtabula, Ohio, the city editor of the Helena, Arkansas Bugle, a stenographer in the Department of Health of Spokane, Washington, a dishwasher in a Bowery restaurant, a flunky in the office of the research director of Black No More Incorporated, a life-termer in Clinton Prison at Dannemora, New York, and a gag writer on the staff of a humorous weekly in Chicago. Matthew received fulsome praise from the members of his organization and the higher-ups in the Southern democracy. He had, they said, forced the government to take action, and they began to talk of him for public office. The grand exalted Gurrah was jubilant. Everything he told Bunny had gone as he had planned. Now he was ready to turn the next trick. "What's that?" asked his assistant, looking up from the morning comic section. "Ever hear of the Anglo-Saxon Association of America?" Matthew queried. "No, what's their graft?" "It isn't a graft, you crook. The Anglo-Saxon Association of America is an organization located in Virginia. The headquarters are in Richmond. It's a group of rich highbrows who can trace their ancestry back almost 200 years. You see, they believe in white supremacy the same as our outfit, but they claim that the Anglo-Saxons are the cream of the white race and should maintain the leadership in American social, economic, and political life." "You sound like a college professor," sneered Bunny. "Don't insult me, you tripe. Listen now, this crowd thinks they're too highbrow to come in with the Knights of Nordica. They say our bunch are morons." "That about makes it unanimous," commented Bunny, biting off the end of a cigar. "Well, what I'm trying to do now is to bring these two organizations together. We've got numbers, but not enough money to win an election. They have the jack. If I can get them to see the light, we'll win the next presidential election hands down." "What'll all be, Secretary of the Treasury?" laughed Bunny. "Over my dead body," Matthew replied, reaching for his flask. "But seriously, old top, if I can succeed in putting this deal over, we'll have the White House in a bag. No fooling. When do we get busy? Next week, this Anglo-Saxon Association has its annual meeting in Richmond. You and I'll go up there and give them a spiel. You may take Givens along to add weight. You don't mean intellectual weight, do you? Will you never stop kidding?" Mr. Arthur Snobcraft, president of the Anglo-Saxon Association, an FFV, and a man suspiciously swarthy for an Anglo-Saxon, had devoted his entire life to fighting for two things: white racial integrity and Anglo-Saxon supremacy. It had been very largely a losing fight. The farther he got from his goal, the more desperate he became. He had been the genius that thought up the numerous racial integrity laws adopted in Virginia and many of the other southern states. He was strong for sterilization of the unfit, meaning Negroes, aliens, Jews, and other riffraff, and he had an abiding hatred of democracy. Snobcraft's pet scheme now was to get a genealogical law passed disenfranchising all people of Negro or unknown ancestry. He argued that good citizens could not be made out of such material. His organization had money, but it needed popularity, numbers. His joy then knew no bounds when he received Matthew's communication. While he had no love for the Knights of Nordica, which he held contained just the sort of people he wanted to legislate into impotency, social, economic, and physical, he believed he could use them to gain his point. He wired Matthew at once, saying the association would be delighted to have him address them, as well as the Imperial Grand Wizard. The Grand Exalted Gurrah had long known of Snobcraft's obsession, the genealogical law. He also knew that there was no chance of ever getting such a law adopted, but in order to even try to pass such a law, it would be necessary to win the whole country in a national election. Together, his organization and Snobcraft's could turn the trick. Singly, neither one could do it. In an old pre-Civil War mansion on a broad tree-shaded boulevard, the directors of the Anglo-Saxon Association gathered in their annual meeting. They listened first to Reverend Givens and next to Matthew. The matter was referred to a committee, which in an hour or two reported favorably. Most of these men had dreamed from youth of holding high political office at the national capital, as had so many eminent Virginians, but none of them was Republican, of course, and the Democrats never won anything nationally. By swallowing their pride for a season and joining with the riffraff of the Knights of Nordica, they saw an opportunity for the first time in years to get into power, and they took it. They would furnish plenty of money, they said, if the other group would furnish the numbers. Givens and Matthew returned to Atlanta in high spirits. I tell you, Brother Fisher, croaked Givens, our star is ascending. I can see no way for us to fail. With God's help, we'll surely defeat our enemy. Victory is in the air. It sure looks that way, the Grand Guru agreed. With their money and ours, we can certainly get together a larger campaign fund than the Republicans. Back in Richmond, Mr. Snobcraft and his friends were in conference with the statistician of a great New York insurance company. This man, Dr. Samuel Buggery, was highly respected among members of his profession and well known by the reading public. He was the author of several books and wrote frequently for the heavier periodicals. His well-known work, The Fluctuation of the Sizes of Left Feet Among the Assyrians During the 9th Century Before Christ, had been favorably commented upon by several reviewers, one of whom had actually read it. An even more learned work of his was called Putting Wasted Energy to Work, in which he called attention by elaborate charts and graphs to the possibilities of harnessing the power generated by the leaves of trees rubbing together on windy days. In several brilliant monographs, he had proved that rich people have smaller families than the poor, that imprisonment does not stop crime, that laborers usually migrate in the wake of high wages. In his most recent article in a very intellectual magazine, and read largely by those who had loafed for a living, he had proved statistically that unemployment and poverty are principally a state of mind. This contribution was enthusiastically hailed by scholars, and especially by businessmen, as an outstanding contribution to contemporary thought. Dr. Buggery was a ponderous, nervous, entirely bald specimen of humanity, with thick, moist hands, a receding double chin, and very prominent eyes that were constantly shifting about, and bearing an expression of seemingly perpetual wonderment behind their big horn-rimmed spectacles. He seemed about to burst out of his clothes, and his pockets were always bulging with papers and notes. Dr. Buggery, like Mr. Snobcraft, was a professional Anglo-Saxon as well as a descendant of one of the first families of Virginia. He held that the only way to tell the pure whites from the imitation whites was to study their family trees. He claimed that such a nationwide investigation would disclose the various non-Nordic strains in the population. Laws, said he, should then be passed forbidding these strains from mixing or marrying with the pure strains that had produced such fine specimens of mankind as Mr. Snobcraft and himself. In high falsetto voice, he eagerly related to the directors of the Anglo-Saxon Association the results of some of his preliminary researches. These tended to show, he claimed, that there must be as many as 20 million people in the United States who possessed some slight non-Nordic strain and were thus unfit for both citizenship and procreation. If the organization would put up the money for the research on a national scale, he declared that he could produce statistics before election that would be so shocking that the Republicans would lose the country unless they adopted the Democratic plank on genealogical examinations. After a long and eloquent talk by Mr. Snobcraft in support of Dr. Buggery's proposition, the directors voted to appropriate the money on condition that the work be kept as secret as possible. The statistician agreed, although it hurt him to the heart to forego any publicity. The very next morning, he began quietly to assemble his staff. And that's the end of chapter 8. Or chapter 9, I should say. How many more chapters are left? It's only 60 pages, so I'm guessing 6 chapters. Last chapter's pretty damn long. 13. I might have to read 2 or 3 in a day to get this done by March. So many chapters there. I think it has chapter mentions. Anyway, there's only like 60 more pages of this book. A classic that is seemingly unforgotten because it's not exactly politically correct and written by a black guy. So people want the black man to write politically correct stuff. And Schuyler was not in the mood to follow suit.